Hi, and welcome to Three Questions, where I ask my guests and colleagues to choose three questions out of five, and then we talk about stuff. And today I am joined by Donalyn Miller, dear heart, dear friend, dear colleague, who is, I'm going to give you a little introduction here. I love this phrase on your website. Donalyn Miller is a free reading advocate. She has written several essential books on the topic of choice and reading lives of children, including The Book Whisperer and Reading in the Wild, and most recently, The Joy of Reading with Terry Lucen. She founded communities of learning like the Nerdy Book Club and spoken out with passion for decades about the power of giving kids agency over their reading lives. She also is a dear, dear friend who I cannot believe I get to talk to today. Welcome, Donalyn.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Of course, I was just as excited to talk to you, Kate. It's good to see you. And thank you for inviting me to be here on the podcast.
Absolutely. So I actually don't even know what questions you chose. I don't. You might have told me or not.
I don't remember.
Okay, so I'm going
What
to
word?
read. This is fun. Oh, this is fun. We get to do them all. I'm going to read them all, and then you can choose which ones you want to answer.
Okay.
Sound right? Okay.
Yes.
Question one is, what's your educator origin story and how would you characterize your current work? Two, if you were given three wishes to use on the American education system, what would you wish for? Three, what is your favorite and least favorite word in education? Four, if you had a motto for teaching right now in our current circumstances, what would it be? And five, this might resonate for you a little bit. Why do you think it still matters to teach students to read more powerfully and independently?
Okay. Well,
So
I'm going to use the last one.
I had a
You know,
feeling. I had a feeling.
and I do like the first one because it's not typical. Um,
Mhm.
let's see. What was the
So
favorite
two is three
education?
wishes. Three is favorite, least favorite word, and then a motto.
Well, let's do favorite, least favorite word,
Love it. Okay, so
origin
let's start.
story, and then what was the last one
Yeah,
again?
it's origin story and characterizing your current work. So let's start there. How did you become an
Okay.
educator? I don't actually know this, which is totally exciting.
Okay, so I'm a second career teacher. I did not go to college when I graduated from high school. I didn't have the resources to be able to do that. I married and divorced at a young age and had a child, and I worked in the hotel and restaurant industry. And I was the front office manager of a large hotel in downtown Dallas when I was 25.
Wow.
And I was undereducated for
Yeah.
who I was. I knew that. And I had a child and I was a single mom at that point. And I realized that I was not going to reach my potential without a degree and that I would need to go back to school. So I really started working my way through that process. And during that time, I met someone and I got married and to my spouse, Dawn, which many people are familiar with Dawn online. And I think many people like Dawn more than they like me, honestly. So they know him. He gets recognized when he's not
Not
with me.
more, just different. Just different.
It's
Just
really
not more.
funny. But I met Dawn, and when Dawn and I got married, and we moved, and I said that wanted to go to school, and I went back to school to be an accountant, and I spent 2 years going to junior college taking accounting classes, and our little girl started kindergarten, and I started volunteering in her class, and I came home one day like 60 hours into this accounting degree. Okay, almost 2 full years. And I told Don, I said, I don't want to be an accountant. And he said, what's going on? And I said, I never wanted to be an accountant. My mom's an accountant. My grandmother was an accountant. I felt like that was just like a good,
What you
reliable
do. Yep. Yep.
job,
Yep. It's a
right?
path I can see in front of me, right?
It's
I know how
marketable
to do that.
skills.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're a
Yeah.
pragmatist when you're a parent. You're like, I need to pay bills. Accounting is
Yeah.
good.
Yep.
So okay.
Yep.
So I said I want to be a teacher. I said I always wanted to be a teacher. And I said and he said, so go be a teacher. And so I
Mm.
changed my major I have 160 hours on a bachelor's degree, is what I'm going to tell you. My major is in
Yeah,
interdisciplinary studies
it's
because I
disciplinary
changed my
studies.
major. I wound up with a minor in elementary ed and world geography, which may surprise a whole bunch of people.
Wow.
And I student taught, and I student taught in some language arts classrooms. I was always a reader, and you know, I want to, when they tell you when you're looking for a job to pick a school,
Yeah.
to when they're interviewing you, you're interviewing them. And
Yep.
I loved the school where I had student taught. They had a sixth grade language arts job open. My mentor teacher vouched for me. The principal said, "Do you think Donalyn can teach language arts?" And my mentor Terry said, "I think Donalyn can teach whatever she wants." And so they hired me. They hired me to teach sixth grade language arts and social studies. And I walked into my first classroom when I was 34.
34.
And I knew when I was student teaching that that was what I was meant to do. I knew that that was why I had been created. I don't, I mean, I'm in my 50s. You get so existential in this at this age, but
I know.
I really
We're
like,
just
I
gonna cry.
know,
We're just gonna
you
cry on this
know,
podcast down when you and me in our
okay,
50s.
well, I've got my napkins right here. So, um, I just, I knew that that was what I was meant to do.
Yep.
And I also knew that for me, the fact that I was already a mom with a school age child, because Celeste, my oldest, was a sixth grader the first year that I taught.
Really?
So I will always
Really?
remember how old my first year of students
Yeah.
are now because they're the same age as my daughter. But for me, I thought that that was beneficial to me. I also felt like my experiences in the business world were good.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
one of the things that surprised me about education, Kate, honestly, was the inertia.
Yeah.
We're teaching The Pinballs by Betsy Byers as a whole class novel for 25 years.
Yep.
You know, it's
Yep.
just, I was
Just
shocked
gets
because when I was
rooted
in the business,
in, right? Yep.
business for, ninth graders come and go, but Romeo and Juliet is eternal, you know. And I think in the business world, it's not like that. Now, I don't
No,
believe in people trying to subscribe a business model to education. I don't. I
no.
think it's horrid, and we can talk about that when we get to our favorite and least favorite words. But I do think one piece that worked for me anyway was in the business world. They kind of subscribe to what I call the Janet Jackson model of management. What have you done for me lately? So it's kind of like you're
A great
only as
song,
good
though.
you're only as good as your last
Yes, that's right.
idea. There's
That's
always
right.
someone younger than you who wants your job, who will take less money. There is
Yep.
always someone who is going to all the conferences and going to the reading the journals and all of those things, and they come up with things in meetings. It is about profit. You can't keep doing the same thing that you did last year because people get bored and they don't pay attention. You're constantly having to reinvent yourself. It is a much more intellectually active environment. And I think that actually surprised me because I thought I was walking into what should be a highly intellectually active environment. But what happened was I would go to staff meetings and we would spend 30 minutes arguing about who wasn't standing by their recess cone.
You don't find that intellectually stimulating?
No, no. And here's what's also horrible. When you come from
Yeah.
that business model like I did and you're successful at it, then,
Yep.
I mean, you speak up at the meetings. And as a woman, you learn
Yep.
you better speak up because
Yep.
a man will speak up and share your ideas if you don't.
Sure. Sure.
And so I'm the teacher that speaks up at the staff meeting,
Yep.
which does not exactly endear you to colleagues sometimes. I
Not all
am
the
the one that
time.
raises my hand and wants to know why we're talking about the same five notable Black Americans for all of elementary
Yep.
school.
Yep. And that's
I,
all they learn about. Right. Right.
you know,
Yep.
so
Yep.
I think like teaching fit me, but I'm not exactly sure the education profession always did. Does
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
does that
It's
always make sense? I was always asking a lot of
constant.
questions,
Well, you
always
enter into
asking
the
a lot.
system, right? You enter into the system that is hobbling along in many ways, right? And then you're
Hmm.
confronting all of those systemic things. Like when you were saying the recess cone, right? We're spending 30 minutes talking about you didn't stand by the recess cone. The thing that I always think about is I'm like, you shouldn't have to be standing by the recess cone. You're a teacher. Do you know what I mean? You should be
Yeah.
There should be people hired because there's so much money in education to be able to hire all the people we need so that someone else can stand by the recess cone. That's not why you
But
got your degree. That's not why you went that's not your expertise. That's not the intellectually stimulating work of teaching. And
I
yet it
never
gets
argued.
bogged
Yeah.
down because teachers are doing all the jobs that other people should be doing because we don't have the money to hire them, right? So
But
now we have
Kate,
to talk about
but,
that freaking recess cone because we don't have money to
but
hire
Kate, there's
an
also
intern to come and stand by the recess cone. It's not that hard to stand by the recess cone,
okay,
right?
but you know what? You and I could also discuss. They're sixth graders. Why do we need to monitor them by stations of recess cones in the first place? I mean, like, there's a part where, like, we complain that kids are not capable. And
Right,
I mean, the profession, kids aren't capable, they can't be trusted. There's a lot of a pervasive disrespect for young people that just weaves through the
constantly.
profession sometimes that is really quite horrifying. But I think we squelch kids so much. We're so afraid of what kids might do
Right,
that we don't
right.
let them do
That's right.
anything. You know,
Instead of realizing that, yes, there are individual kids who are gonna make very poor choices, we as the adults can handle that when that happens and make it a teachable human moment as opposed to trying to like set up all these conditions so that kids don't ever be kids and make stupid mistakes. Do you know what I mean? And even cause some harm, not like big harm obviously, but the little things that we have recess cone stations for, right? Like those kind of problems. But that we can handle that. Like I have a friend who had a daughter who became a teenager and she wanted to let her have some independence. So she was letting her walk into town with her friends alone and
hmm
like be in town with her friends, then come back. And it was the first time, it was probably around sixth, seventh grade. And she said to me, she's like, I know that she's going to do X, Y, Z. And I know, I suspect that trouble is going to come. But, like, she's like, "We need to have that trouble emerge so that we can talk about it." And so there was a time that she came home, like, an hour late, do you know what I mean? And instead of being like, "Well, this is why you can't do this, is shut it down," right? It becomes a conversation. Anyway, I did wanna say one thing with your answer because I couldn't help but notice that when you talked about student teaching and that you wanted to become a teacher, that you teared up, and so did I. You could say no and we can edit it out, but I'm wondering why? What was that emotion there for you?
Okay, well, I am 8 years out of the classroom, but I'm not out of the classroom. Do you know what I mean? Like, my heart is still there. I'm just not. There was a
Yep.
time when I chose not to do it, and honestly, now is the time where I'm not allowed to do it.
Mhm,
And so it's heartbreaking to me, but
mhm.
because I miss it terribly. And but I also remember what that felt like. That joy of having your all your stars line up, where
Yeah,
you are exactly where you are supposed to be, in this place, in this time, with these
yeah,
people. And that's how I felt with my students every day. I was
yeah,
meant to be there in this place with them right
yeah,
now.
yeah.
And I miss that. I miss young people. I'm very, very worried about our young people. When you
Mhm.
have a heart for kids, I think, I mean, not that I have all the answers, of course, but I feel like I could be strong arms and a good heart for the
Yeah,
effort.
yeah,
Um, so I think my emotions are all tied up in that. I mean, I'm still a teacher. I, you don't. Being a teacher is not. It's not a job. It's about the way that you look at the world.
yep,
And I still look at the world with a teacher's eyes, and I
yep.
always will.
I always will too. You know, the emotion that came up for me is I think similar in that, you know, I had been searching similar to you. It was kind of not career, but I was just wandering for years in my 20s after college. Like I just was like, I don't know what to do. I worked construction, I waited tables, I did retail, I worked on a farm, I did PR, I did marketing, I worked in a law office, I was a paralegal. I was just like,
Oh my
what am I going to
goodness.
do in this world? Right now, this is a privilege, right? To be able to try to choose what you want to do with your life. But
Hmm.
also a terrifying one, right? The freedom of that, of like choosing. And I remember that the first time I walked into a classroom, also a sixth grade classroom here in Hartford, to teach a playwriting class, like an artist in residency thing, because I was doing theater. Um, I remember walking into that classroom and feeling so humbled by how impossible this job was. Like seeing these kids and seeing and just being in this environment in a different way, not as a student now, but as a teacher, and just feeling like I could work at this forever and never learn how to do it. Not really. Do you know what I mean? Like I could work at this forever and
I
still have
still feel that way. I
I
still
still
feel
feel
that
that.
way.
I know less now than I did back then, probably that day one. That's not totally true. I know some things very, very well. And then there's all these things that I'm like, I have a ton to learn. I'm never going to get it right. And there's something so beautiful about that, right? Of a lifetime of work to achieve something truly important, truly fulfilling, which is to like reach young people and move them forward towards their agency and dreams and goals. And like the idea that I still get moved in my job now, even though I'm not in the classroom and I work with teachers, the
Hmm.
idea that we get to work with teachers to make classrooms more sustainable for the classroom teacher, right? Like more
Hmm.
happy for them and then
Hmm.
effective for the kids.
Hmm.
It's the honor of a lifetime.
It's just, we're in the hope business. I've said this before. Teachers are in the hope business. We believe in a better world through the teacher, through the kids and the families that we
Yep,
serve. And
that's right.
and our students, and you and I have just changed students now, but we're
Yeah.
still in the hope business. We're still in the hope
We
business.
are.
We are looking at the world and going, okay, we have to keep moving forward as humanity, and education has the tools. Literacy, we certainly believe, has some of the
That's the truth.
tools to help us move towards a better world for all of us, more
That's right.
equitable, cleaner, safer world for everyone.
That's
um,
right.
so
All right. So let's move on. So question number 3. This time we're not going to cry, Donalyn. Okay. We're not going to cry.
I don't
Because
know, are you at the angry crying stage of your life?
uh,
Are you an angry crier? Because my least favorite
yeah,
word
I
might
am
make
an
me angry
angry
crier.
crier.
Okay, so
Anger is hard for me in general. Like I'm good at ranting, but I'm not very good at anger, if that makes sense. Like I can like pontificate about my anger, but I can't really feel it. Anyway, this is not a therapy session. Question number 3. What is your favorite and least favorite word? Oh, you want 2?
oh no, I understand now. I understand. It is number
Oh,
three
yeah,
on your
question
list,
number 2. Got it, got it, got it,
but
got
it
it.
is
Yeah, I got
only
what
the
the least.
but it is only the second question
It
you
is
are
only the
asking.
second question. Question number 2, which is question number 3. What is your favorite and
Yes.
least favorite word in education?
My least favorite word is stamina. I resist. Kids are not racehorses. I hear so many complaints about kids not having stamina for reading. I mean, one of the things is they can't read a whole book. And then I go, when are they asked to? They
Right.
can't make it through a whole test. When do you ask them to read anything that isn't 3 pages long? I mean, when we really start breaking down what kids are asked to
Yep,
read over the course of a school year,
yep,
they're reading
yep,
textbook chapters, test
yep,
passages,
yep,
web pages, primary
yep,
source documents,
mhm,
that worksheets. When are they being asked to really read
yep,
250 pages of something in less than a month? I
that's
mean,
right.
really. So I think we can't complain that kids don't have endurance for committing to long stretches of reading if they're never really asked to participate
Well,
in long
that's
stretches of reading.
and supported. Do you know what I mean? Because the thing that always strikes me is I know that there's lots of places that are like, "Oh, okay, we'll try a little reading," and, like, give the kids a book and be like, "Read the book," and then the kids are like, "No," and they're like, "Well, it doesn't work," right? And it's like,
Results
what
vary.
are results vary,
Results
results
vary.
vary. So, but that work takes real support and fortitude
Mhm.
and belief
Mhm.
and hope and understanding why it's important and small successes and all that stuff. So, what is it about the word stamina? Because what I hear you saying is that you do agree, right? It's not the concept of building kids' ability to have
Well,
sustained periods of.
I think endurance is a better word. Stamina,
Mm,
it makes me think of racehorses. I mean, really, they're not racehorses. They're children. They're adolescents. So it just feels like harsh language to talk about young people, and it's right along with the militaristic language that we use in school. I'm fighting this. I'm battling this. I don't
mm,
like all that either. But with stamina, it's like we look at the kids like they're athletes somehow,
yeah.
and they have just not met the mark, and they don't have
Right.
stamina like
Right.
racehorses.
Right.
There's also a part of me that's like, if school wasn't so painful, so boring, so
Mhm.
disrespectful to kids, maybe they wouldn't need so much darn stamina.
Right.
Right? I mean, we talk about reading like they're crawling through broken glass.
I
It's
know.
like
Mhm.
I talk to teachers all the time and I say, look, we can't change. The standardized testing movement started in my own state of Texas. We're not, back when George Bush was our governor, that's how
Yep.
far, with the Houston miracle that we all learned was not a miracle. Anyway, that's
Yep.
how far back it goes. And so I understand that no single teacher is going to be able to tilt at this windmill successfully. So I think we need to, what we can do is look at what we do have control of, which is how we talk about reading with kids could change tomorrow. We could
Yep.
make it not sound painful. We could make it not sound like they're suffering. And we also could stop being so suspicious when kids enjoy it without our control.
It must be bad if they like it,
you know,
right?
oh my gosh, if five middle
Everybody-
schoolers are all swapping a book. Now, you and I know if five middle schoolers are all swapping a book, there's a reason. But
There's a scene. There's a
I also
scene.
clear,
There's a
I
scene.
also clearly remember my friends and I standing in front of the big giant dictionary in the school library and looking up as many
Mhm.
anatomical words as we could and
Do you know the
copying
one
down.
book I read on my own when I was a kid? The one book that I read on my own, Forever by Judy Blume.
If you're only going to
That
read one case,
it was a great
that
book.
wasn't a
I
bad
learned a
choice.
lot. I learned so much, right?
Did
I'm not
someone
arguing for
recommend
that.
that
I'm
book
not
to you?
arguing for, let's be
Did you
clear,
get that book from
world.
a peer,
Donalyn and I are
Kate?
not arguing for putting books with sexual content into the classrooms purposely. That's not what we're saying, right?
No,
And
no,
yes,
no, no, no,
no,
please,
no,
please, no.
no.
The
Heaven
laws keep
forbid.
changing. If I
Violence,
say it
fine. You want
right
to
now,
decapitate someone, that's great. But please don't put sexuality in the hands of children. Anyway,
having
but
this
the
conversation
idea,
in my state could be a problem while we're recording it. So we should just be careful here. The
but I
laws
think
might
your
change
point.
while we're recording.
Well, I think your point, like when we talk about things like stamina or endurance or just the capacity to read for a while, right? Because endurance has a little of that negative connotation too, right? It's like something to be endured, where it's like really we're talking about like just capacity, the ability to, right? Like whether or not you love it. Because sometimes I think this is a place where you and I have a slight difference that I enjoy sort of feeling, right? Because
Hmm.
your work is
Hmm.
so devoted to nurturing a love of reading. And I believe and I use your work all the time. I also feel, right, that I'm like, I know there are people who will not love reading, right? I know, and that is okay too. They still can read, right? They still have the capacity to be able to click into a book and read it and think about it and analyze it. And that really, I mean, it's not that much of a difference between us because if I create a culture of love of reading in my classroom, then the kids who don't love it will usually toe the line, right? And okay, I don't love it, but everyone's doing it, so I guess I'll do it too.
I think, you know, I mean, when people who have read the book Whisperer
Yeah,
and they get to that chapter on whole class novels,
yeah.
and then later on, they see that I endorse your book, A Novel Approach.
I
And
know,
they have
I
asked
know.
me, people
I
have asked me
have
about
they?
it.
Have they?
The
I thought
person
about
who
that
asked me to
when
write the endorsement asked me about it. Are you okay
I'm
to
sure
do
she
this?
did. I'm sure she said to
Kate,
me that she was gonna be like, I don't know if Donalyn will endorse your
Kate
book.
thinks that you might do this. Will you? And I was like, but here's the thing. I don't think extremes are good in
Mm,
education. I don't think orthodoxy is good. I also think that, I cannot profess to be the learner that I have just described already in this discussion and not continue to grow. I think what I was seeing with whole class novels, you also don't agree with. It's just that it's
100%.
almost like, you know, it's the every book takes 8 weeks. It's really just an opportunity to pile a bunch of reading related activities on kids so we can generate grades. Teachers get very uninspired while they're doing it. It's like everybody, we start to do things like every chapter you must write down 5 vocabulary words. I mean, just
I know.
it's not, it is not a scaffold
No,
to the world of reading and
that's right.
literacy for kids. It
That's
doesn't even reflect what kids will be
no, it's an
asked to do.
obstacle. No, it doesn't reflect anything that they're gonna be asked to do, right?
No.
One of the things we talk
So,
about. Sorry.
and that also severely limits their reading and writing, right? When kids are
Yeah.
only reading 5 or 6 books a year, they are not becoming college and career ready. I mean, this is
Mhm.
one of the complaints that colleges have is that kids cannot sit there and handle the massive amount of just reading that they're
Reading.
being expected to do in college. And comprehension is assumed at that
Yep,
level.
yep.
Motivation is assumed. No one's
Mm,
giving you a sticker or a pizza coupon to go read 50 pages for your biology text. They're
mm,
not. So, I mean, you and I love our middle schoolers, but we can also tough love this. They have got to be able to read and understand a massive amount of information at their
yep,
jobs,
yep,
at college, at their
yep,
trades. I mean, I have a friend who's an airplane mechanic, and the training that she went through to get that certificate was like 2 years. And I remember her sitting there with her giant books with manuals, trying to memorize all the parts of airplanes. I mean, massive amounts of reading with comprehension. So I think we're doing kids a disservice by teaching whole class novels in that way.
I do
On
too.
the other hand, you've got to teach the kids how to read. You got to teach the kids
Something
how to read,
hard that they
and
don't want to, right? To your point, because like,
okay.
if I have to read, like, an airplane manual someday, right, you see almost like an evolution, right? I have to start with love of reading or all this idea of, like, I choose, I read, I choose, I read. We might read some books together as well that we love, but I can't
Hmm.
go from, like, read things you don't wanna read and just keep reading things you don't wanna read forever, and they just get harder and harder and harder, and then someday you're gonna be able to
Hmm.
read the airplane manual. That's
Hmm.
not gonna
Hmm.
happen, right? It has to
No,
start from a place of what we're talking about,
well,
real
it has to
reading.
be anchored in mentoring and in strong instruction, and I mean, optimum small group size. When I talk with teachers, I will sometimes ask them this question, and it's a little bit of a trick, but I will say, in utopia, where none of us will ever teach, what is optimum small group size? The ratio to teacher to kids.
Mhm.
And I will just have teachers just come up with numbers, right? And I'll
Mhm.
hear all sorts of things 3, 5. Somebody said 7 once, and somebody else at her table gasped. So that just kind of took care of itself. But, so I didn't have to say anything. But they came up with all these numbers. And I looked at all of them and I said, optimum small group size is 1. It's
Mhm.
1.
Yep.
It's 1. The minute we
Yep.
start making it 2 kids or 3 kids or 4 kids, we're compromising. We have to. They may have similar reading goals, but they are not the same individuals. They do not bring the same linguistic experiential reservoir. We could throw out our Rosenblatt
Yep.
here. They do not bring the same experiences to the table. They don't all have the same um, identities or backgrounds. So we're making compromises the minute we start putting 2 readers together.
You're right.
So this is one of the reasons why the conference model works so well is because you are getting those opportunities to have that optimum small group size on a regular basis with kids. But
Yep.
there are benefits to having book club size
Mhm.
groups, working groups where kids are working on a specific standard or a specific question or a specific inquiry problem together.
Yep.
And then there's that whole group mix too. And I think, um, you know, people sometimes read books like The Book Whisperer, Reading in the Wild, and they imagine that my class is just some kind of free reading fest with no direct instruction and no
I know.
grades.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that I wrote Reading in the Wild is because I got so many emails from teachers saying, "How do you get grades?"
Right.
That's what they would ask me. Like, okay,
Yeah.
this all sounds great, Donalyn. How do you get grades? And I'm like, you do understand I still have to teach all these standards, right? And my
Right. I'm
kids
still doing other
still have to
things. Yeah.
take this assessment at the end of the year. It's not camp. We're not all just
No.
lying around in beanbag chairs, knitting bookmarks and things. It's just like real learning has to happen. So there could have been some transparency around that too in the way that I write about it. It's just I'm not interested in writing about those
I
things.
know. I know. Well, there's so much out there about, right? It feels like that part is not the problem we're facing as much, right?
I
The
will
problem
stay in
where
my
it's
independent
just
reading
not
lane
building those
forever.
kinds of experiences. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I mean, that
I think
independent
about
reading
that.
lane doesn't have very many people in it.
It's
So
true.
it has.
Not these days.
There are people that move into that lane for a while, but they move around. I may be one of the
Yeah.
other people that just kind of that's what I write
You live
about.
in that
That's what I
lane.
want
That's
to
your
write
lane.
about.
It's a
I
good
don't.
lane,
Somebody
Donald.
they asked me once if I wanted to write a book. One of my publishers asked me if I wanted to write a book about writing, and I said no.
Yeah.
No, you don't need me to
I'm
write that
back.
book. The world does not
No.
need me for that. Okay, my
No.
favorite word in education:
Yep.
libraries.
Ah, Donalyn. Yes, it is.
My favorite world,
Libraries.
maybe one of my top 10 favorite words that doesn't involve, my family. So,
Libraries.
libraries with the big L. Um, because libraries are a school.
Yep. Yep.
Libraries are a path to your education. And for a long, long time in America, for some of us anyway, libraries have been a way to have free access to information and ideas. As that uneducated, or let's say undereducated young person that I was when I was 19, 20, 21, 22, 26, I educated myself with reading. And probably one of the ways I was able to walk into college at 28 was because I continued to grow my background knowledge, my conceptual understanding, my vocabulary. What I didn't do a whole lot during those years was write a whole lot,
Right.
so I did really have to step up on some of that. But for me, and when I was a kid, I grew up in an impoverished home. I'm the oldest of four kids. We didn't go on summer vacations. My brother has cerebral palsy and is in a wheelchair. A lot of our money went towards medical expenses when I was a kid. And I babysat my siblings while my parents worked. And but I went everywhere. I went all over the world and through time every
That's it.
summer because I had a
That's
library
it.
card.
That's
And
it.
uh, I just saw online somewhere someone was talking maybe on Threads. They were trying to anchor like what was the pivotal reading experience of Gen Xers, like what is
Yeah.
something they can point to for those of us that grew up in the 70s and the 80s as a literacy or literary experience that we might have all had. And people were putting all sorts of things in. Flowers in the Attic came up with quite a few people. I saw that.
100%.
You had already talked about Forever, Judy Blume. There was a good smattering of Judy Blume on the list.
Sure.
But what I said was Stephen King,
Oh, yeah.
because you
100%.
remember Steve. I mean, I'm older than you, but not by that much. But I
Not by
am,
that much.
and I remember when all of his books were being made into movies, Cujo, and he was the Creep Show, and he was on TV, and all of this, and he was like a personality, one of the first authors I had seen that had become almost like a pop culture
Celebrity.
celebrity.
Yeah.
And so I would say Stephen King would be the person.
Yeah.
But I for years, I just wrote about this. For years, I would say ninth and 10th grade, especially, my only criterion for selecting books when I went to the library was to pick the fattest book I could find. Because my sister and I only walked down there once a week. And I
Yeah.
wanted a book,
Yeah.
I wanted one story
That could
to
last.
fall into and one book to keep track of for the entire time. So
Yeah.
I mean, that random way of picking books led me to all sorts of things. So anyway, libraries would be one of my favorite words because I think they are a school. They are a path to your education. That's one of the reasons why, even if you don't enjoy reading, I hope many young people grow to appreciate it as a path to learning. We're blessed now. We're fortunate that we have so many other paths to learning with media that's widely
Yeah.
available to us. But honestly, when I was a kid, books were the thing. Books and television were most of it. And
Yep.
I also think that libraries are one of the true bastions of democracy
Yeah.
in
I
our
was gonna say
country.
refuge. When I hear library, I
And
think refuge, right?
it's community too. I live in the beautiful city of San Antonio. We have it has such a community spirit here, community of caring here that I haven't always felt in other places where I've lived. We have 23 free public swimming pools in San Antonio. We have a cooling state. Fort Worth has two, which is where we came from, and the glorious libraries here. And one of the things that I love about our libraries here is just what a hub for the community they are. And I think good libraries have always been like that. I think there's a famous librarian scholar who said, bad libraries build collections, good libraries build communities. I'm
Yeah.
paraphrasing, but
Yeah.
it's free. It's one of the last free
Right.
public spaces that are
Mhm.
available for people to go to and to hang out in. Free Wi-Fi, access to the internet.
Yeah.
I went to the library yesterday. We have a beautiful library, the Lanta Library, which is in an old house that someone donated to the city, and their grounds of their gardens are all around the
Oh, wow.
library. It's beautiful. And they have all these ornate like gargoyles in the corners and all of this. It's beautiful. And so it's a good place to go write. And so I was writing yesterday. And so I took my iPad down there and I was writing. And I saw people filling out job applications. I saw a lot of people getting voter registration applications and filling them out, you know. And I know that there are people there who are just enjoying the air conditioning,
Mhm.
and who are there to get a drink of water. And they're out walking, they're out traveling through our city, and the library is free and available for them no matter
Mhm.
why they're there.
Yeah.
Libraries are one of my favorite words in education, but I think you can tell they're probably just one of my favorite words. That's
Ever.
probably just one of my favorite words.
Yeah. I love that. I mean,
You would not see me here if it wasn't for the library. I would not
yeah.
be the book whisperer without the library.
Yeah. Or the person that you are, right? Or probably
Oh.
as intact and soulful and wise as you are.
And emotionally messy. Readers
And
are really
emotionally
close to our
messy. I mean,
feelings.
we're in our 50s on when we're allowed. I think you are the only also menopausal woman that I have interviewed. So I really like this energy between us because we can just
Well,
sit here
I
and
don't have
be
to be the last one.
no,
There are a lot of
no,
us.
you probably won't. But I enjoy that
Your
we can
next
just sit here
podcast.
and cry together. Yeah, next podcast. Come on and cry. Come on and cry.
As the heat flashes.
Yep. Roll over you. So I love also that you were, with library, you're talking about community. And I think like so much of what we're seeing now, and I'm a media person. I'm on the internet all the time. I'm on social media. I'm
Mhm.
doing all that stuff. I'm
Mhm.
not obviously against it. I'm for it. I think it's great. And it keeps isolating us, siloing us, getting us in these bubbles, right? And those
Mhm.
places where, I more and more, especially now as I'm uncovering ways that like, you know, uh, whiteness and white supremacy has affected me and shaped me. And one of the main things that I've been seeing, that I've talked about a bunch on this podcast, it's come up a bunch, is this idea of community, right? And not having
Mhm.
to do it alone. And how much I have internalized some of that. You have to do it alone. You have to be self-reliant. You have to achieve all those kind of things. And I
Mhm.
think to your
Mhm.
point, the idea of the library really flies in the face of that, right? There's nothing to achieve here. You're here to be in community with other people, to get what you need that's on offer, to rest, to find refuge, to read. And then also to connect, right? To get answers, to organize, to do all that other stuff that we do in libraries. It's incredible.
In the best version of itself, a library is about equity.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really is. It
It
is
really
about
is.
that free access to at
Yeah.
least a minimum level of community care, a
Yep.
minimum level, and not just a minimum level of education.
Yeah.
Really, you could, I mean, I understand. I may
Yeah.
not have taught myself some math things when I was doing all that self education at the library, but you know what? I learned a lot. And I think there are a
Learned a
lot
lot.
of people who will never go to college, who don't maybe even want to go do those kinds of
We've
things,
learned a ton.
who still seek learning through the library, whether it's through the computer or whether it's through audiobooks or whether it's through the paper collection
Yep.
or sometimes just the resources of the people who were there.
Yep.
Before there was the internet. I don't know if you're familiar with the author Susan Orlean. She wrote the book The Orchid Thief,
Yeah.
but she also wrote a book about libraries, and
Did
she
she?
wrote a book about the Los Angeles Library and a fire that took place there, and how the it was never solved. But when she was talking about the libraries, she was talking about really how, okay, now I've just lost my train of thought. That's also a menopausal thing. We
There
could
we
talk
go.
about the
There we
brain
go. Oh
fog
yeah.
thing where we
Just
don't even know,
falls apart.
who am
Yeah.
I? Why am I
Yeah.
here?
Why am I here? What was I to say?
Who am I
I'm
talking
dropping
to on
thoughts
this screen?
mid-sentence when I'm presenting sometimes. And I'm like, what? Like I'm just standing there like, yeah, I don't know. Give me a
One
moment.
of the things having watched you present, we'll just change subjects for a second. Having
Yeah.
watched you present many times, like me, you are not a person who puts a bunch of bullets on your slide. And thank the stars that you are not someone who just sits there and reads off your massive text dense
Mhm.
slides.
Yep.
But my slides aren't like that, and neither are yours. But now I think a lot of times my slides are just there to remind me of what
It's
I'm
all,
supposed to
what am I
say
saying? What
next.
am I supposed to say
Because,
now?
oh yeah,
And
I forgot to tell him that
and
part.
then you
Oh
just
yeah,
hope
there's that
that the
story.
words will actually come, like, even things that I presented on a million times, you know what I mean? I'm like, the slide comes, I'm like, yeah, that is a good slide there, that picture of a sunflower that designates something I'm supposed to say right now. What is that? It's humbling.
I'm pretty good about quoting research and everything. I want to cite the people who are teaching me. And I not mispronounced, but I called a library researcher by the wrong first name for like 6 months.
6 months.
Like I said, her name was Deborah. It wasn't Deborah
We
at
just
all.
have
It
to
was
give
some
each
other
other
name.
grace.
And
This is
finally a librarian corrected me. How
hilarious.
embarrassing is that?
It is.
So
It's all horrifying. It's all embarrassing. But
I was like,
teaching
was
is
that our last
embarrassing,
name?
right? You know
The
what I love? I
citation
love
correct.
That's right, that's right. I love Tom Newkirk's book on embarrassment in education. Did you ever read that? It's a beautiful book
Yes. I
because
also
there is
think
so
Colleen
much
Cruz's book
embarrassment
on
in
mistakes,
education.
those two
It's
together,
incredible.
Tom's
Colleen
book
Cruz's
on
book on
embarrassment and
mistakes.
Colleen's book on
Yep,
mistakes. Like, I feel like,
yep. Risk, Fail, Rise is Colleen's book. Why are all these
I
big names?
love that book. I feel like because it came out in like 2020 or something, maybe people haven't seen it that much. I
It's
remember
new for me.
Colleen and I were at a conference at some point in the past 4 years, and we got to both talk about the joy of reading, and she talked about it. But exactly, like we're creating a culture where mistakes can happen, and if adults feel like they can make mistakes, maybe kids can be allowed to make some mistakes every now and then too.
Well, one of the
Okay,
things I
what's
think
our
about
last
PD, and then
question?
we're going to go to the last question, but one of the things I think about with PD is like especially when I'm demonstrating in classrooms, like I used to design like the perfect lesson and work for
Mhm.
hour, you know what I mean? And really like be like, okay, I've got to demonstrate, so I've got to have something really great. And these days I really just am like, I just want to show up the way we all show up, which is with a you know what I mean? Like I'm planning, but it's like I'm not planning the perfect thing, because if I go into your classroom and I just present perfection that I had tons of time to do and think about and, make sure every I was dotted, every T was crossed, that's not a realistic vision of what it feels like to teach lessons in sequence every day, all year long, right? You just don't have the time to
Mm-mm.
make it perfect. And so you
No.
have to, as a teacher, get comfortable, I feel, diving into the imperfection and just muddling through and forgiving yourself, right? When you mess up or it doesn't go off the way you want it to.
Oh,
Uh,
one time I
Having
had
that
to do like
ability.
a live conference. Have you ever tried to conference in front with kids while other teachers
Oh,
watched you
yeah.
do it?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
the part that's always nervous making to me because one, I think you don't really have great conferences with kids until you have relationships with them, which means I'm a stranger and
Yeah.
kids are in a fishbowl. But I also feel like the continuity of the process, of
I don't
like
know
I know
anything
where
about
they
you.
came from, I know where he wants to
Mhm.
go, and so we're gonna have this conversation. So I think
Mhm.
that makes it tricky too. So similar, right? The inauthenticity of it probably rankles you a little bit too
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes. But
Totally.
sometimes when I'm working in other people's classrooms, I just want to know, what do you want to know about your kids
That's
today?
it. That's it.
That's what I tell them. What do you want to know about your kids today? So if you're working on XYZ and you would like me to help figure out,
Hmm.
what they do and don't know about one of these concepts, or
Hmm.
you want me to have a conversation with them, or you're working on examples of something, I can do that.
Yep.
If you're just, um, of course, generally what people want me to do is talk to their kids about the books that they're reading.
Sure.
And
Not a
so,
bad thing. Pretty
but
great.
but I don't talk to them as much about the books that they're reading as I think people think that I will.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because
Right.
I think one of the reasons we fall into that is because what we're trying to do is catch kids not reading.
Right. Right. It
You know,
becomes
one
an
of the
inquisition.
reasons
Yeah.
one of the reasons people confer, I think, sometimes is because they see it as a way to hold their kids accountable for whether they're
Mhm.
reading or not. And, it is an accountability piece, but I
Sure.
always looked at it as like my students knew I was going to come talk to them eventually and that they
Yeah.
probably should read something before I came back.
That's right.
That was
That's
about the level of accountability.
that's
That
right.
I mean that was the hard accountability around that,
Yep.
right? And what I often want to know about kids is like, what are they planning to read next? Because that
Mm,
to me is a much more interesting answer.
yeah, I love that. Yeah,
Because
what are they
I mean, yes, I want to
goals
know,
that
do
they
they
have?
comprehend the books that they're really reading? But I never walk. I didn't. This is I've learned this over my career. It's like I want to know what they're planning to read next because
Yep,
it's just to me, it's the insight
yep.
that you gain. Like a kid who says IDK when you ask that question,
Hmm.
and he's on page 200 of his 250-page book. We might start
I'm
considering that you
thinking
might
about it
do
a little
this
bit.
again.
Yeah,
You might
yeah. This
start
is
to
not the one
consider.
time you're going to read a book. You are actually going to read them over and
Oh
over
gosh, I
again.
joke with teachers that for some of our kids, they see reading like bungee jumping. Like, oh, I did that once.
I did that
I
once. It was
don't,
scary.
I don't
It
feel
was
a burning need to do
terrifying.
it again anytime soon. It was terrifying, and
Yep. All right. Well, this leads us to the last question pretty nicely because the last question is really, Donalyn. The reason why I write this question is that what I'm noticing in schools is that reading's declining, reading books is declining, reading, and then also reading with our eyes, like reading, like a book. And I'm not devaluing. I say this every time I ask this question. I'm not devaluing audiobooks. I listen to audiobooks. My son listens to audiobooks.
uh-huh.
I want people to use audiobooks. All of that is great. And I'm really curious why it matters still, if it matters still, that kids read the written word in a book with their eyes independently. What do you see as the value in? And again, it doesn't mean there isn't value in other things, right? It doesn't have to be. It's not
Oh
pie.
no, 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 no! I just realized that there's never going to be enough time for us to talk about this.
No, probably not.
Okay, so the thing about reading, I mean, we could talk about language arts in general, but the thing about reading is it is both a skill and art appreciation.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of walk in both of those worlds and wander into one of them more than the other. So, high school teachers who only treat, and then this is me being just stereotyping and just making broad statements. We
Tons of
will get
exceptions.
there, I promise. Okay.
Mhm.
So, high school teachers who may be more traditional in their approach to teaching English may see it as a humanities course, and that what they are supposed to do is expose children to or young people to works of literature that is it about, I don't want to say indoctrination, but let's say enculturation to a
Yep.
canon, that
Yep.
there's a certain path to being an educated person in the United States, and traveling through these works is
Yep.
part of it. And that is a way to look at the teaching of English. Um, then you have another completely divergent group
Yep.
and I think this is a really Common Core fed a lot of this because all of the pressure, it seemed, to increase nonfiction reading fell on the language arts teachers. And that was not, I mean, I'm talking to someone who wrote Pathways to the
Mhm.
Common Core. So you tell me, you and Chris, so you tell me if I'm wrong here. I'm in a state that doesn't use it.
I didn't
But
co-write. I just read it. Chris wrote it, but I didn't co-write it.
yeah, so yes, thank you. So I think what I felt happened was a lot of the emphasis on Common Core around increasing the amount of nonfiction that kids should be expected to read, rightly so, was
Mhm.
not embraced by science teachers, social studies teachers, math teachers, PE teachers, art teachers, anybody else. It was just the message got filtered down that language arts teachers needed to be ditching fiction and dramatically increasing the amount of nonfiction that kids are reading. Reading is skill based. We remember all the comments about how nobody cares about your feelings and all these other
Mhm.
things. Do you digging into your personal experiences with reading a text? Who cares about all of that? Where it was kind of back to it's a skill. Uh, Kids loving reading or embracing it as an art form is a random occurrence.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Serendipitous perhaps, and should not be a goal that teachers should strive for. What we should really do is make sure all of these people can read.
Yep.
And so I think I've felt that tension my whole teaching career, over 20 years now, and I think it's both,
Yep.
which means it's neither one of those things.
Yep.
you know
Yep.
it's neither one of them.
It's
um,
both and
it's not either one of them. So I think now what is happening is that we have just completely forgotten about the art part of the language arts.
Yeah.
It's not an art form. The written word as an art form or as
Yeah.
a historical record is not seen as still valuable.
Yeah.
And so, whether or not we can consume information through other means, the book, the physical book itself,
Yeah.
is still an art form.
Yeah.
It's still an art form. I remember when ebooks and audiobooks first came out, and of course, all the messaging we were getting was that books were dead. And looking at the Pew Research Foundation and their
Mhm.
snapshots of readers in America, we can see that audiobook use is on the rise. What is it, 21% of American
Mhm.
adults report listening to at least one audiobook every year.
Mhm.
I'm in that group. You're in that
Yeah.
group. I think a lot of the adults we know are in that group. Uh, but the people who buy the most audiobooks and ebooks are also the people who buy the most paper books. Readers just want to read.
I just
We
want to
just
read.
will take it in any form we can get it.
Yeah.
But I've worked with enough teenagers. I mean, Jeff Zentner, the young adult author, I don't know if
Yeah.
you're familiar with
Yeah.
him,
Yeah.
but he wrote his first two books, I think, on his phone. And the
Wow.
idea that he wrote The Serpent King on his phone while he was traveling back and forth to work on the bus. Yes, yes, Kate, yes. Um, that just makes my mind go, okay, I just can't even imagine it. And I do see young people who read entire books on their phone, friends of mine who are adults that do. But I also talk to teenagers all the time who want the paper book.
Yeah.
They prefer the paper book. My own daughter, I tried to get rid of my Kindle once. I was going to show a book to you that I want you to read. I remember I just became disenchanted with my Kindle because it died on a trip, and I had to have someone drive me to a bookstore. And I tried to give Sarah my Kindle when I came home after we got it repaired, of course. And she said, "Is there an aromatherapy button so that when I push it, the paper smell
Yes.
comes out?" So I think,
Yeah.
now, and I don't think that this, I mean, is it a group that gets smaller every year that has an appreciation for the art of the physical book? Maybe, but it's not that small of a group. I think it's
Well,
still a
and
pretty
as
significant group.
educators, we're in charge of that a little bit. I mean, that's the thing that's always interesting to me, which is why I asked this question, because I'm like, I want to be skeptical. I feel like there's a reason why it still matters that kids sit and with whether it's endurance or stamina or some sense of I can do this for a while, sit and read a physical book. I still feel like it matters and I have my reasons, but I also am open to being wrong. I mean, I'm open to the fact that we might be evolving away from it. We clearly have other avenues, which I think is fantastic
Mm-hmm.
because I think it
Mm-hmm.
opens up new capacities for people to enter into story and learning. But there's something about it that I feel like gives you another level of agency because if
Well,
I'm
it's
reading, I
active
know
too.
yeah, it's active and I
It's
can
active too.
stop.
A lot of the ways that we consume information is exactly that. It's an active consumption. It's passive watching. I love to watch television. I mean, I'm a kid
Listen,
from the 80s. I'm a
me
latchkey
too.
kid.
Me too.
I watched
I'm
a
all
lot of
this all the
TV.
time. Here we go. Yeah, all the time.
Dawn and I binge watched so many shows during the pandemic years, but it's passive.
Yeah,
It's passive,
yeah,
I mean, the way the characters look and the way they react and the way the setting looks and all of that. I don't have to visualize anything. I don't have to pull from my own experiences. It's all just given to me there. And, the nuances and beauty of our language, I think, are being lost. Like, there's a book that was written for children called The Lost Words. Have you seen this book? You might
mm-mm,
like it for your boys, but it's called The Lost Words, and it's about words that had to do most of them with nature that were removed from children's dictionaries so they could make more room for more technologically based words.
oh
And
wow,
someone wrote a beautiful picture book. It's one of those oversized ones that
that's
librarians don't like
fantastic.
because you can't
Oh,
just shelve it. But it is a picture book that has all these beautiful words like meadow in it that have
oh,
been taken out of some children's dictionaries. So, the beauty of the written word, one of the only ways we know anything about ancient man is because of what was written down.
yeah,
One of the only things we know about the origins of almost all the major world religions were because of what was written down
hmm,
and the stories that were passed down generation after generation after generation, you know, and
yeah,
whole communities that were denied access to the written word as a way of controlling them, of denying their agency, of denying their very humanity. And so I will always want people to have access to words because I know what it looks like. Well, I understand what it
Yeah.
looks like when they don't.
When they don't.
And I feel like that's what's happening right now is who benefits? I mean, I ask this question a lot.
Who
Who
benefits?
benefits?
Hmm.
Who benefits when our libraries become less open and safe?
Yeah.
Who benefits when our kids do not have the intellectual stamina to commit to complex ideas?
Yeah.
Who benefits when the art of the written word is lost? Or when the art of the written word no longer becomes humanity's art? And
Right.
that's the whole conversation about AI that
Yeah.
is happening right now. You know, um, if we consider writing to be art, art is an expression of the human experience, are the agony and ecstasy of what it is like to be human. It's the Earth story, right?
Yeah.
The big story. There
Yeah.
is only really one story,
Only one
and it is
story.
how to be a better human being. And we
That's
tell
it.
that story over and over and
That's
over
it.
again. And we've told it for millennia. And,
That's it.
even if the written word, let's not say it disappears, because I'm not a scholar of these things, but I am quite fascinated with how we went from pictorial representations
Hmm.
to pictorial
Hmm.
representations again in
Hmm.
our use of language. If you look at the arc between like
Yeah.
cuneiform
Hmm.
to emojis, I just
Well,
want to
you.
talk to someone who really is a scholar of these things to talk to me about that because I
Yeah.
find that very fascinating.
So I was talking to someone who was talking about how, like, even the way we treat spelling now, not in schools, not in business, but in society, is very much like it used to be in like old whatever world something, where like the name of your town might be spelled a million different ways, but you just figured it out phonetically, and like everyone just kind of figured out how to spell things, and we're sort of back there in a way, right? There is a cycle happening in some ways.
But what culturally causes that?
Yeah.
And what does that tell us about literacy?
Yeah.
What it really does tell us is that literacy is evolving. We
Yeah.
can never presume to know what reading and writing, dramatic expression, speaking, listening, like what all these things might look like. What we do know is that we are a species meant to communicate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we are another Tom Newkirk book. We are made of stories. We
That's
are
it.
made of stories. And so, how will our stories evolve? Because we will still keep telling them. We're not going to stop telling stories if we stop having paper books. We're not going to stop communicating. And we're not going to stop seeking emotional and artistic expression for ourselves, ways of learning. So, I mean, we can be open hearted about it. I still will say that I don't think books are going to go away in my lifetime anyway. Even any more than single issue comics will go away. Uh,
There it is.
you
That's
can
it.
still
That's
find
it.
those.
You can. I love, and to end here, although I could talk to you all day long about this, I love that, just tapping into that idea of like humanity and the one human story. And, one of the reasons why I did this podcast was sort of to talk about my book, and I'm trying to sort of thread it into each conversation, although I'm failing most of the time because I'm bad at marketing. But I think one of the reasons why I wrote The Heart of Fiction was to try to tie that very human story in the way that, so much of why we read is because we're connecting to our own lives and our own ideas of things. Like, yeah, I can talk about character motivation, fine. I can identify a character's motivation, but it's much more generative to say, what motivates me? What am I motivated by right now in this part of my life? And how does that hit up against what I'm seeing in this story, right? Which is another story of people wanting things and being motivated and trying to get those motivations met. And I think that idea of like, I mean, it really is threaded through this entire conversation, Donalyn. The idea of like a library where we come together in community, the idea of a classroom where we come together as readers and care for each other, and the idea of books and reading where we're looking for each other out there, right? We're looking for, I'm not alone.
Well, that's another reason we read, yes?
Yeah,
Because
I'm not alone.
We experience things. And
Yeah.
it's good to know that we're not alone. I remembered what I wanted to remember about that Susan Orlean book, so I will tell
Oh,
you.
exciting.
So we
Tell me.
can end with a couple of things, and you can cut them out if you
Perfect.
want. But Susan
Perfect.
Orlean and her book about libraries, what she was, one of the things that she talked about was before the internet, the research desk at the library was the
Yeah.
internet.
Yeah. That
And
was the
they would do nothing all day but take phone calls from people asking them random facts, asking them about aardvarks, asking them about the history of California, asking them about canning, like
Mhm.
asking them about beekeeping. Like the research desk was a hopping place at the library.
Awesome.
So, the library still offers all that. It's just the tools that they use to give it to us um, are a little different now. I don't know if you've heard about silent book clubs. Have you heard about the phenomenon of silent book clubs?
I have heard of this. Yeah.
And I don't know if you've
Where
had any
people go and
of your guests talk about it.
haven't.
So when I first heard about them, there were about 500 of them in the country. The last time I checked, there's over 1,000. But it's
Wow.
silentbookclub.com is kind of the anchor website for it. But basically but there are chapters all over the country, and there's two here in San Antonio. I've got to believe, up where you are, there's probably at least one. The greater New York area certainly has probably quite a few. But the way a silent book club really works is there's usually organized around a Facebook page or an Instagram account. The San Antonio one has an Instagram account. And people show up at a predetermined location and predetermined time. They bring their books with them. They sit and read in communal silence, 30 minutes to an hour. And then they have fellowship, networking, talking about books. Sometimes they meet at pubs. So I'm sure they might lift a pint. I know one of the ones in San Antonio, they met at the McNay Art Museum. One was at a community center. So just different botanical gardens. Some
Yeah,
of them
yeah,
are
yeah.
just, church community group halls,
Yep.
wherever they can all just come together. And uh, I just think it's a fantastic idea.
Fantastic
I
idea.
I have some librarian friends here who invited me to a book club, and I don't go because
Yeah.
I don't like all the books that they pick. But I
Right,
would
right,
love
right.
to go just to
Yep.
go hang out with them.
Yep.
I like the idea of you don't have to be finished before the meeting. That pressure. I've sat
Yeah, 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 yeah. Deadlines.
long ago when I was more tightly wound. I remember sitting in my car trying to finish my book club book before the meeting. So no pressure to do that anymore. And you get to network with readers of all ages at these groups, because they're all bringing whatever it is they want to read. The last time I went to a meeting, there was people in their 20s, most of them younger than me.
Yep.
I was one of the older people there. Um,
Yep.
so of course, I wanted to know what everybody was reading the whole
Of
time.
course.
Like
It's
I
a
just
book
wanted a
rex.
networking part.
I
I just
know.
want to
I
know,
know.
like, what was
What are you
everyone?
reading?
And too many
What are
people
you
had
reading?
Kindles. That's what I'm going to tell you. Too many iPads and Kindles for you to just
Mm.
spy on what other people are reading these
Yeah,
days.
yeah, yeah.
Um, anyway, let me know if you get a chance to check one out because I'd be interested
I'm
in
gonna
your
check one out.
impressions. But I think about our dear middle schoolers and how many middle schoolers, and it was always a group that would be standing on their toes, bouncing up and down on the balls of their feet, waiting for the librarian to unlock the doors,
Yeah.
and the conversations that we're having around soft starts with kids these days. And I just think a middle school library in the mornings would be a great place to, test out a silent book club.
I love that. I love that. Well, that is a
And
perfect place to end, I think, in terms of are you gonna give us a book
I
recommendation?
do,
Because
but
I'm
you can cut it out. You can stop it if you
I
want
know I'm
to.
not cutting
Okay.
anything out,
So
I'm
I don't know
being
if you
as
read Dear Medusa last year by Olivia
nope,
Cole. It
nope.
was a popular young adult book, and it got several star reviews. But the follow up by that author is Ariel Crashes a Train.
Oh, wow.
Olivia Cole is the author's name, and I am still reading it. And I'm kind of getting into doing book talks on books I haven't finished yet too,
Mhm.
because there's
Mhm.
something about talking about the wanderings that you have. But it's a
Mhm.
book about a girl with OCD, and
Mm.
I have never read a book as provocative as this one in that regard. Really trying to get into like the fear about how she feels about herself and her own mind around the OCD.
Yeah.
It's not an external description.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
really going
Good.
into the identity and space of someone who is experiencing OCD.
Mhm.
And I'm just, it's a powerful book. I'm
Yeah,
feeling a lot of things reading it. But
I
I
love it.
just, when I was looking at my pal this morning, I was like, if Kate asked me for a book recommendation, Because sometimes people ask. Sometimes people
I'm
ask me
sure
for
they
those.
do. I'm sure they do.
If Kate asked me on her show for a book recommendation, what am I going to recommend? And I was like, oh, this one, because
This
even if
one.
Kate cuts it out, Kate will want to read this book.
Not cutting it out. Everyone wants to hear your book recommendations, Donalyn. Donalyn, this has been a joy. Thank you for coming on and connecting and being your full human self. And yeah, we're going to keep on keeping on. Here we go. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to chat with you. I really, I feel like there's, you and I have had some tremendous conversations, 15 minutes at a time over the course of our relationship. And it's been a real delight to get to talk to you for a much longer amount of time. So thank you for the gift.
Thank you, Donalyn.